Story 1. The Phantom of Black Hollow Cemetery. In the small rural town of Ashbury, there's a local legend about Black Hollow Cemetery, a graveyard hidden deep in the woods. The cemetery is old, so old that many of the headstones have crumbled, and the names etched into them are no longer legible. Few people visit the cemetery, and even fewer are brave enough to venture there at night. Mara and her friends had heard the stories about Black Hollow Cemetery for years. According to legend, a spirit known as the Phantom of Black Hollow haunted the graveyard. Some said that those who dared to visit the cemetery at night would encounter a ghostly figure in a tattered black robe, wandering between the tombstones, searching for something or someone. The locals believed that this spirit was once a man who had been wrongfully executed for a crime he didn't commit, and his restless soul was condemned to wander the graveyard until he found justice. One October evening, just days before Halloween, Mara and her friends decided to test their courage. They planned to visit Black Hollow Cemetery at midnight. It was supposed to be just a fun, spooky adventure, a way to scare each other and share ghost stories by the light of their flashlights. Mara, though nervous, didn't want to be the one to back out. The night was dark, with only the faint glow of the moon filtering through the trees as they made their way to the cemetery. The group laughed and teased each other, but as they approached the entrance, a heavy silence fell over them. The air felt colder, and a sense of unease crept in. As they entered the cemetery, their flashlights illuminated the cracked headstones and overgrown weeds. The place looked abandoned, forgotten by time. They wandered deeper into the graveyard, staying close together as the eerie atmosphere weighed on them. Mara felt as if someone or something was watching them, though she couldn't see anything unusual. After about half an hour of exploring, one of Mara's friends, Jason, thought it would be a good idea to call out to the phantom, challenging the spirit to show itself. His voice echoed through the graveyard, but there was no response. The group laughed nervously and continued walking. That's when they heard a faint whisper carried by the wind. Mara's heart raced as she turned to her friends. "Did you hear that?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I thought it was just the wind," Sarah, another friend, said, though she looked as frightened as Mara felt. But the whispering grew louder, more distinct. It wasn't just the wind. It was a voice, low and raspy, repeating the same phrase over and over again. "Not guilty. Not guilty." The group froze, scanning the darkness with their flashlights. That's when they saw it, a figure in a long black robe, standing by one of the older graves. Its face was obscured by the shadows, but there was no mistaking the figure's presence. It seemed to float rather than walk, slowly making its way toward them. Panic surged through Mara as she and her friends turned and ran, the flashlight beams bouncing wildly as they fled the graveyard. They didn't stop until they reached the safety of the road. Panting and out of breath, they looked back, half expecting to see the figure following them. But there was nothing there, only the silent cemetery in the distance. Shaken, they vowed never to return to Black Hollow Cemetery. Though they all tried to rationalize the experience, Mara couldn't shake the feeling that the legend was real. Whatever they had encountered that night was not just a figment of their imagination. The Phantom of Black Hollow was still searching for justice, and Mara hoped she would never cross paths with it again. Story 2. The Gravedigger's Curse. In a small town on the outskirts of Ohio, there was an old cemetery known as Green Hill Graveyard. It was a place where generations of locals had been laid to rest. The graveyard had an ominous reputation, not because of any particular ghost story, but because of the fate of its gravediggers. Over the years, several gravediggers who worked at Green Hill had met untimely and mysterious deaths. The locals believed the cemetery was cursed, but no one knew the source of the curse or how it had begun. Jack Williams was the latest in a long line of gravediggers who had worked at Green Hill. He had heard the stories, but he wasn't superstitious. To him, it was just a job, one that paid well and kept him outdoors. Jack had been working at Green Hill for over a year without incident, and he had grown comfortable with the solitude of the cemetery. One chilly autumn afternoon, Jack was tasked with preparing a new grave. As he dug deeper into the earth, his shovel hit something hard. He paused, assuming he'd struck a rock, but when he cleared away the dirt, he uncovered something far more unusual: a small wooden box, intricately carved with strange symbols. It was buried just a few feet beneath the surface, far too shallow to be part of any formal burial. Curious, Jack pried the box open. Inside, he found what appeared to be a bundle of old, yellowed papers tied with a ribbon. The writing on the papers was faded and difficult to read, but Jack could make out a few words, enough to realize that the papers were a curse, written in an archaic script. The box also contained a small weathered doll, its features grotesque and unsettling. Jack wasn't one to believe in curses, so he thought little of the discovery. He tossed the box aside and continued digging, eventually finishing the grave and preparing it for the upcoming funeral. That night, however, Jack's life took a dark turn. He was awoken by a strange noise, a scraping sound like metal on stone. Groggy, he got out of bed and went to the window, expecting to see an animal or perhaps a tree branch scratching against the house. But what he saw made his blood run cold. Standing at the edge of his yard was the same doll he had found in the cemetery, its eyes gleaming in the moonlight. Jack blinked, thinking his mind was playing tricks on him, but the doll remained motionless and staring directly at him. Shaken, Jack closed the curtains and tried to go back to sleep, but the scraping sound continued, growing louder and more insistent. He spent the rest of the night tossing and turning, unable to shake the feeling of being watched. The next day, Jack returned to the cemetery to rebury the box and the doll, hoping that doing so would put an end to the strange occurrences. But as he dug the hole and placed the box back into the ground, he noticed something unsettling. The graves around him appeared to have been disturbed. Dirt was scattered, and the headstones seemed crooked, as if they had been moved in the night. Over the following weeks, Jack's life spiraled into a nightmare. He began seeing the doll everywhere, standing at the edge of the cemetery, peeking out from behind trees, and even appearing in his home. No matter where he went, the doll seemed to follow him, its lifeless eyes always watching. Desperate, Jack sought the help of a local historian, hoping to learn more about the symbols on the box and the curse it contained. The historian told him that the curse was centuries old, tied to a woman who had been wrongfully executed for witchcraft. Her spirit had been bound to the cemetery, and the curse was her way of exacting revenge on those who disturbed her resting place. Jack's health began to decline as the haunting continued. He grew pale and gaunt, plagued by nightmares and the constant presence of the doll. One evening, after a particularly terrifying encounter, Jack vanished without a trace. His house was found empty, with no signs of a struggle, and the doll, now weathered and dirty, was sitting on his bed. If you enjoyed these spine-chilling stories, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss a new horror tale.